people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
I said to my dad, they've offered me $6,000 to play pro football. And he said, let me see if I understand this right. He said, they've offered you $6,000 to play something? I thought you had to work. I said, well, what do you think I ought to do? He said, I think you ought to take it.
During the 1950s, pro football's rough, rugged image was embraced by a prosperous but placid America. The sport gradually assumed a larger-than-life posture in the popular culture of the period. But for those who played during this era, the game of their lives was a small-scale sport, minimal in scope, modest in ambition.
When I first came into the league, there were only 33 players on the team, and there was not any movement of players. And we played together year after year after year, and the fans, they didn't have that many players to learn, and they all were there every year, and so they knew all of them. They knew the names of every player on the team.
You had a 12-team league playing a 12-game schedule for most of the decade. A nice little, tidy little package. The entire NFL season in those days consisted of 72 games. In today's season, it's over 240 games.
Pro football's popularity grew by leaps and bounds. Per-game attendance increased in every year of the decade.
Season ticket prices are $21. Individual game tickets, if you prefer to buy them that way, are $4 and $5.
Awkward baby steps marked this coming-of-age period. On-field pageantry and on-air highlight shows had yet to reach maturity.
You have all the dope ready for this weekend, Glenn? I sure have, Paul. This week's script is really action-filled. Thanks, Glenn. And now here is our lovely Miss Antifreeze of 1958, Yvonne Lime.
Thank you very much, Paul.
And what about game number 1 this week, Yvonne?
Well, our first game this week is the Chicago Cardinals playing the Washington Redskins at our nation's capital.
It was the era of crew cuts and crazy legs, hop-along and night train, the hula hoop, and the alley-oop. These nicknames, like 50s fads and fashions, became part of the American scene. But at the dawn of the decade, pro football was barely even on the map.
Pro football was a relatively minor sport. It was for aficionados. People knew, small number of people in each city knew that this was a great sport. This national sports psyche was Major League Baseball. The be-all, end-all was the World Series. Suddenly, there is this new game, and it is a quantum jump for the average fan in what he has ever seen in terms of speed and power. But it hadn't gotten hold of the national psyche.
Friends, we greet you from the office of Bert, Commissioner of the National Football League at 1518 Walnut Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The fastest growing sport in football and certainly one of the most spectacular.
Bert Bell was the guy who molded the clay of what professional football would become.
We expect to have the greatest year and show the greatest football was never known in the history of the world.
To deal with strong-willed people like George Halas in Chicago and George P. Marshall in Washington took a diplomat on the order of Disraeli.
There's no excuse for expansion in the National Football League. We furnish football now for free through television. Expansion can only weaken the personnel.
Bert Bell came to every training camp talk to us like a father. If you never needed anything or so forth and so on, yes, you can get in touch with me.
Each camp that he visited, the same spiel, but that always ended up with, don't forget, boys, call me collect anytime, night or day, Mohawk 44400.
So I called the National Football League office. He picks up the phone. You think you could call the National Football League office today and the commissioner will pick up the phone? He picked up the phone. He said, Johnny, what you need? I say, Mr. Bell, I'm getting ready to buy a house tomorrow. I'm looking for my check. I don't have it. He says, no problem. So just come right over here and get it.
And also, remember, this is a man who made up the league schedule. Today, they use a computer. He would sit there with a table in Narberth, and I'd say, what in the hell is this? It was a checkerboard and dominoes on there with the names of the teams.
I want to say that I never saw anything like this. For 60 or 70,000 people to do this for the Green Bay Packers and the city of Green Bay, it certainly should set an example.
In football-hungry Green Bay, fans felt like they could drop in at any time. The Packers won just 35 games during the decade. But with America becoming a tuned-in nation, television ensured that every NFL team could become a hometown franchise. Television allowed fans across the country to feel that Green Bay spirit.
Certainly are no stranger at all to our television cameras. As Bob mentioned before, if you aren't already, do you plan to be a Packer fan in the future?
Oh, I certainly do. There's no doubt about that. I'm looking forward to that game this afternoon.
The Chicago Cardinals won fewer games and far fewer fans than the Packers. This hard-luck franchise stumbled and sputtered in surroundings straight out of the Twilight Zone.
I remember one of our early practices with the Cardinals. We were at the University of Chicago, and we were on an old practice field that they had, and I looked up in the stands, and it was all covered with black tar. The seats, all the seats were covered over with black tar, and there were little smokestacks sticking up through the stands. And I said to whoever I was talking to at the time, I said, that's kind of funny looking that they'd have stands that looked like that with little chimneys coming out through the stands. He said, yeah, that's where they invented the atom bomb.
With a pair of thriving franchises in Los Angeles and San Francisco, the NFL was pointing the way west for professional sports.
We had 3 games that we had 105,000, 103,000, and then 100,000 in a row, and that was before big television.
With exciting players like Jaguar John Arnett, number 26, the Los Angeles Rams were averaging 83,000 fans a game by 1958. The Rams' glossy sheen was enhanced by their proximity to Hollywood. One of the team's most prominent stockholders was comedian Bob Hope.
Hey, those long passes, John, those long runs. Boy, you're almost as good as I am.
Who are you? They call you Crazy Hips?
Yeah, what about it?
That nose?
Watch it, I'm a stockholder, watch it.
The Rams exuded class in the front office as well as on the field. A public relations director named Pete Rozelle burnished the team's golden image. The Rams were kissed by sunshine and starlets. They were envied by almost everyone who played east of the Mississippi.
We used to take a lot of razzmatazz, yeah, from the opposing team with giving it the mouth business, calling us the Hollywood fags or whatever they wanted to call us, and because you know, we had it too good out here, and they didn't have it that good back east, and they didn't.
And Edgar Jones, Donnie LaValle, and Cliff Lewis agree that they ought to be in pictures too. The Browns head for one of the sound stages, hoping to get a glimpse at some star.
One time we got invited in at the Alan Ladd's house. A little guy played Shane or something like that. Yeah, he's a good actor. We were riding by and we saw him out there washing his car. And we said, hey, you're Alan Ladd. He says, yeah, I know who you guys, but I don't know your names. You're the Colts. He says, yeah. He said, come on in. So 5 of us went into his house.
When the 50s began, pro football was considered a game for roughnecks and renegades. But the Rams roster was stocked with photo-friendly athletes who possessed genuine glamour as well as true grit. Quarterback Bob Waterfield was like Gary Cooper, a strong, silent type. His wife was actress Jane Russell.
In Hollywood.
Russell, accompanied by husband Bob Waterfield, lead celebrities attending the Gala Imperial Ball.
When I would go by the dressing room, they wouldn't pay any attention to me. They'd come out and they'd want the guy's signature, and they never looked at me at all.
Elroy Hirsch was perhaps the game's most well-known player of the period. Hollywood placed a call to Crazy Legs. But while Hirsch was a game breaker on the field, he proved to be a bust at the box office.
Fighting loyal we stand, true to the team.
It's no secret that the fans and papers are really honest. You know what they're saying. That we're front runners. That we're folding now that the pressure is on us. They're even saying we haven't got the guts to be a championship outfit. Well, we're going to take it. Come on, let's get out there.
Now get set for the play of the day.
In real life, just as in fiction, the Rams demonstrated their championship character.
And races all the way to score for Los Angeles. A 72-yard touchdown play.
In the first game to ever be televised nationally, the Rams showed why they were arguably the most exciting team in any sport. They also demonstrated how entertaining pro football could be.
Collective shoulders of the new world's champions.
While pro football was beginning to take off, leaving the ground could be an ordeal. Before the jet age took hold, air travel was a marathon test of endurance and patience.
Traveling from Cleveland to L.A. took you 24 hours. We had 4 motor planes, go from Cleveland to Chicago, Chicago to Denver, and Denver down to L.A.
Welcome aboard, Cleveland Browns. We'll fly at 10,000 feet with a speed of 230 miles an hour, and we'll land at Denver. I know we'll have a nice trip.
One time we were playing L.A., coming out of Denver, all the fat guys sat in the back of the plane, see? And you got to go up over those mountains. It took us an hour in that B-24 to go up over the mountains.
In fact, our quarterback, Lamar McHann, he was afraid to fly. He would get on the plane and just lie down in the aisle. And that's the only way he could bring himself to do it. He'd have a couple of something to settle himself down, and then he'd lie down in the middle aisle, and that's where he made the trip.
On these long flights, planes were transformed into airborne training rooms and high-altitude recreation centers.
One of the more interesting aspects of the trips are the card games that go on. End Bill O'Connor, halfback Tommy James, and center Tommy Thompson try to outdo each other with the 52.
I guess that there were some teams traveled by plane. I think one of the early ones was the Packers, but they traveled in 2 planes, so the planes weren't big enough to really accommodate the whole team, so it almost had to be train rides initially.
Beat the Bears, shout the Packer fans in a rousing send-off as the train leaves for the Bear game at Chicago.
A long train ride, like from Chicago to L.A., took 3 days, where the train made an extended stop. We'd be out doing calisthenics.
I can remember a couple of times stopping and getting out and just finding an open field and practicing in no goalposts, no nothing. Cows had been there before us, so it was a little hazardous.
We went out, took 3 days to go to California by train. We stopped and we practiced, and then we finally got there. And of course, now we win the game. And then I said to myself, oh my God, now we got to go back for 3 more nights and so forth, 4 days by train. Oh, and it was terrible.
Johnny Oshevsky, Johnny O, was my roommate on the train. And we talked for hours and hours about what he had done growing up and what I had done growing up and what I hoped was going to happen in my life and what he hoped was going to happen in his life. And it was a close time, yes. You made a lot of close friends because you had a lot of, I guess you could call it, intimate time with your teammates.
Puts the Bears on their way to another score. Willie Gallimore reverses his field, bobbles the ball, gets it back, shakes off tackler after tackler.
The game's broadening popularity was propelled by pure speed.
Boom, boom, boom.
first time in pro football history, because of the way the game had opened up and you had offensive players who could just get down the field so fast, you literally had to defend every blade of grass on the field.
But strong arms earned more attention than fleet feet.
Baltimore's premier performer is number 19, Johnny Unitas. In 4 seasons, Unitas shot from sandlot obscurity to professional football's Player of the Year.
Detroit will be banking on its ace quarterback, Bobby Lane, number 22. Lane, a standout performer in past championship games, plays at peak when the pressure is on.
Quarterbacks with folk hero qualities became the focal point of the NFL's new narrative. The farther the ball was thrown, the more enthusiastically fans responded.
In professional football, a major element in how it took off was how they perfected the forward pass. Now, that didn't have to do with guys slugging it out in the trenches. That had to do with superior athletes throwing and catching the ball, and how quick striking it could be, and the long bomb.
10 seconds left. The Lions lead it, 31-28. Again, Owens flank to the right. This has got to be the alley-oop. There is no time for anything else. Tittle throws. Owens is double team. He's going downfield near the goal line. He goes up. He's got it.
There was this sense about the decade that just about anything was possible. The teams were willing to try anything to move the football and to make the game more exciting and to become a more popular game nationwide.
The game's wide-open style also included weird, wild plays. These free-for-alls offered a bizarre blend of improvisation, inspiration, and desperation.
There was a lot of laterals and funny things. Sort of sandlot plays sometime, if you might want to say so. That worked.
It was more wide open. We had what we called a dipsy-do, and where you'd fake a pitch out to a back, and then you'd spin around, get back to the fullback coming back, and then hand off to an end around.
Then there were those strange-looking plays where a runner with the ball would be tackled, maybe a leg tackle, but the defender wouldn't hold him down, and he'd sort of scramble up and run additional distance because at the time you had to be pinned down to end the play.
Dangerous, because oftentimes when you started to get up, there would be somebody else arriving, like a Sam Huff or a Night Train Lane or somebody like that, and you could get hit pretty hard.
You had to make sure that if you made a tackle, that guy was not going to get up and run again. And it was hard on that running back because you'd think nothing about dropping your knees in the middle of his back so that he wouldn't get up and run.
You would sometimes make different moves. You might go into someone that's going to tackle you, but try to put yourself in a position to spin a little bit. There was a couple of incidents like that. I knew I was going to get hit, and I forearmed him, thinking I would roll over him and be able to get up and run again.
San Francisco's Hugh McElhenney was definitely a hard man to pin down. A 49er coach had tabbed him the king of the halfbacks, but the subsequent shorthand for this nickname ensured that pro football, like rock and roll, would have its own hip-swiveling king.
McElhenney is one of the great runners in pro football,
And he proves it right here as he takes Tittle's short pass and eludes line after line on a beautiful game-winning dash.
McElhenney never ran for 1,000 yards in a single season. Yet this ball carrier, who ran at breakneck pace, symbolized the breathtaking tempo of pro football during the 1950s.
He was sort of a hero among all of us, to be honest with you, because he looked like what a pro football player should look like. He would walk in a restaurant, they would say, "There's the king," see?
Settle back while Marlboro takes you to the Los Angeles Coliseum and meet one of the most spectacular runners in pro football, John Arnett of the Los Angeles Rams.
You know, I grew up in the era where every movie you ever watched, this person drank a cocktail and had a cigarette.
Meet Paul Hornung of the Green Bay Packers, Charlie Connerly of the New York Giants. Settle back with your Marlboro, Charlie.
Alex Webster always smoked on the sideline. Yeah, you know, he would get under that cape and just, you know.
The guys that didn't like to smoke had to get out of the locker room at halftime because they were going to get smoked on.
I'd say 75–80% of the players did smoke. I did see Bobby Lane. We had an assistant coach who smoked, and he was smoking during practice. And we were back in the huddle, and we came back in the huddle, and Bobby reached and got the cigarette from the assistant coach and took a couple of drags off of it while he was calling the play.
Conditioning was awful. I mean, just bad.
Dick doesn't go in much for Fancy Dan calisthenics, but feels that plenty of this jogging is the best conditioner for his legs and body. Dick is never out of shape, and a warm-up like this is all he needs to play a full game of bruising football.
Crazy Legs, how do you keep yourself in condition?
That's easy, Captain Midnight. Plenty of sleep, exercise, and the right kind of foods. And I drink chocolate-flavored Ovaltine. But be sure it's Ovaltine and not just an ordinary milk flavoring.
Art Donovan used to bring hot dogs with him from home to the locker room the day of a game. Have him in his locker. Be sitting there eating 5, 6, 7. So Artie fell in love with eating hot dogs, and he used to bring them on the field, put them on the bench in a bag beside him, eat them when he came out of the game.
Narcotics or dope was never even a consideration. We didn't even know. I think marijuana, everybody talked about marijuana, but I didn't know anybody that smoked it. So our biggest abuses would have been beer.
They said, "Did you lift weights when you were playing?" The only weight I lifted was a 24-ounce can of Schlitz.
Students in their seats, figures on the blackboard. That's Coach Paul Brown at the head of the class. Lou Groza has a question, and Coach Paul has the answer.
Paul Brown epitomized what's going on elsewhere in the culture, the ultimate organization man, the ultimate bureaucrat, the ultimate father figure treating his players as if they were children.
He stressed the good guy, good person image, and that was a part of the Cleveland Browns' creed. And if he felt a player couldn't meet that, then he was gone. He once traded Doug Adkins because he caught him belching in a meeting.
Paul Brown founded the Cleveland team, named it and shaped it in his cool conservative image. But to the players, the man known as Father Football remained distant and aloof.
In all the years I played for him, he never took a shower with the team. He had a phobia about that. He'd go back to the hotel, clean up. He always wore a shirt to practice, shiny shoes. And then he'd go back to the hotel.
From a coaching standpoint, we have no regrets, really. We gave it everything we had, and you just take it like it bounces and fight and scratch and do the best you can, and our men tried hard.
The Browns won 4 consecutive titles in the All-American Football Conference. And when they joined the NFL in 1950, they were almost equally dominant. Led by players such as fullback Marion Motley, number 76, the Browns went to the championship game each of their first 6 seasons in the NFL. Quarterback Otto Graham, number 14, embodied the Paul Brown ideal. Graham was a leader, a winner, and a clean-cut family man who became one of the decade's true marquee players.
Plan on staying all night, Otto? This afternoon's game's over. There'll be more games. I guess we're about the worst team that you've ever had. No, you're wrong, Otto. You gave your best out there today. You and all the boys. It's just today you met a better team. They deserve to win. Defeats and setbacks are all a part of growing up. Sometimes we learn more from a defeat than we do from a victory. Now, you listen to me, young man. Adversity not only tests one's character, but it also strengthens it. And don't you forget that.
Otto Graham set one sort of example, and Detroit's Bobby Lane set another. Lane was known for playing hard all the time, even after curfew.
Over the course of his career in Detroit, Lane really became the epitome of the good old boy, you know, the guy that working class fans who like to hang out at the bar and argue about football with their buddies could most easily identify with.
In the 50s, you'd go down and pick up your check on Monday morning, and Bobby would be waiting for you there at the stadium bar, and he'd take out a $50 bill or a $100 bill and lay it on the bar and say, okay, let's have a few drinks. And you would. It bonded and gave you the camaraderie that I think a lot of other teams didn't have.
The Detroit Lions won a couple championships in the 50s, and they did so with a team that was at least known for, you know, a bunch of overgrown boys who knew how to party and have a good time.
Certainly no Lion was more overgrown than beefy lineman Les Bingaman, number 65, the game's biggest player.
You're looking at Les Bingaman, 320 pounds of dynamite. And here, mounted on a lineman's blocking sled, is Ford's new Lifeguard steering wheel. Watch what happens when these two tangle. What a wallop! But he wasn't injured because the steering wheel cushioned the shock and his body never touched the steering post.
But it was the indestructible Bobby Lane who stood as the Lions' lightning rod.
This is a man's game. That's the title of a cover story in Time magazine. Bobby Lane epitomizes that idea that pro football is the game played by men, for men, you know, in the audience, not women, not kids. You know, this is a man's game.
Part of the appeal for Bobby Lane was just this image of fearlessness he projected. Otto Graham put the face mask on his helmet in 1953. A lot of quarterbacks did. Bobby never put the face mask on. When he retired in 1962, he still wasn't wearing a face mask. Didn't wear hip pads. Didn't wear thigh pads. And the flimsiest shoulder pads.
Somebody got by me and threw Bobby for a loss, and Bobby's got the ball and laying there on his back, and he came up off that ground, that index finger just at me right in front of the world, just chewing my butt up, down, and around. And I looked down on Bobby and I said, Bobby, I guarantee for the rest of my career, I'll never, ever let everybody get to you. And I think that's probably what made me end up as an All-Pro, that I didn't want to take the wrath of Bobby Lane because he wanted to win so badly. If he said he could do it, and if you gave him time, he would do it.
On the sideline, the Lions' Bobby Lane keeps his passing arm warm. For with Detroit trailing, time becomes the all-important factor. The clock shows less than 3 minutes to be played as Bobby Lane fades to fire another aerial. Lane's going all the way on this one. He has a man open. It's Jimmy Dorn, and he grabs it for a sensational touchdown.
The Lane-led Lions and Cleveland met in 3 consecutive championship games. Detroit won 2 of them.
I don't know that the Lions were, in fact, wilder and woollier than every other team. They're probably wilder and woollier than Paul Brown's Cleveland Browns, because Brown wouldn't have allowed them to get away with it. But because they were a championship team and because they had in Bobby Lane a particularly charismatic figure to focus on, they're the team that developed that image.
My first year, I played for $8,000. That's what I signed for. Carl Rosenblum and Don Kellett, who was the general manager of the Baltimore Colts at that time, they came down there and signed me. Don Kellett asked me, did I have any money? I said, yeah, $20. So they gave me $250. And I thought maybe they were being nice and kind and giving me the money. The first check I got, they started taking it out. I didn't know that was a loan.
And you kind of felt like, you were a second-class citizen at the time to baseball. Baseball had everything. I mean, $100,000 ball players, Ted Williams was playing, Mickey Mantle, all these guys making $100,000. In 1959, I was the most valuable player on defense in the National Football League. I was making $9,000 playing in New York City. I had to have a job. So I went to a friend of mine who ran a thoroughfare market in Fairmont, West Virginia, and I said, hey, you need somebody to bag groceries, carry them to the car, and I can do that.
Everybody had an off-season job, and the practices would sometimes be scheduled so that the players could also earn a couple bucks at another job during the season.
And I'd play the game on Sunday, go to work 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and did that for quite a few years, and was making more money as the terminal manager for this truck line with a company car than I was making playing football.
We would have a meeting 9 o'clock, which lasted till 10:30. Then we went out on the field at 11 o'clock, and we stayed for an hour and a half. 12:30 we were done. I got myself a sandwich, and I went to work with a ready-mix concrete company. And that's where I got my nickname, Concrete Charlie.
Low salaries often forced players to pool their resources. It wasn't unusual for 3 or 4 of a team's bachelors to share living arrangements during the season.
When I was single, Bill Pellington, Schuler, and I, we bought a house. Well, we used to go home at night and wrestle, those two against me. And they'd get me laughing, and they'd put my 2 legs over my shoulders, and they'd whop the heck out of me. And I'd laugh, I get to laughing so hard, and there were 3 wild guys. And then Schuler got married, and Pellington got married, then I got married.
Wives of the players, naturally, are among the most enthusiastic fans. Jackie Groza is on the left, and her companion in the white scarf is Mary Ellis Bumgardner, wife of Rex Bumgardner, a former Browns halfback, and now a sheriff in West Virginia.
We had a Tuesday rule, and it was Weeb's Tuesday rule. And everyone always laughed about the Tuesday rule because you were not supposed to have any kind of intimacies after Tuesday. And they always said it was the worst kept rule in the league.
When a young man's in his 20s, you think that rule is going to have any effect? I don't think so. So I think that was totally a figment of Weeb's imagination.
I mean, that was bad news, the fact that you did something like that the night before the game. That was supposed to take so much out of you. That was the myth. That took so much out of you that you couldn't possibly perform the next day.
Jane Russell demonstrated that wives had ways to break these rules. In a scene that recalled one of her movies, the actress surprised husband Bob Waterfield and his road roommate Don Paul.
Billy, Don's wife, and I had gone to Chicago because the game was going to be that Sunday. We were in the Ambassador East, and they had the team in the Ambassador West. But there was a tunnel underneath that you could walk through under the street. So I put on my fur coat over my pajamas, and I went under the tunnel, and I knocked on the door, and Don opened the door, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Don, go east. I'm staying here tonight." And he just had a fit, but he went.
Camera has a tough time penetrating the blizzard as Paige Cothran attempts a field goal. It's blocked, and the Steelers have killed the threat.
Yeah, I don't remember enjoying playing in those conditions. We had like 3 or 4 charcoal buckets on the sideline. That's the only way to keep warm. That's the only way we had to keep warm.
We had one charcoal hamburger maker at Yankee Stadium, and the quarterbacks and the kickers were all around it. You couldn't get close to it.
And you had a pail of water and 3 or 4 dippers. If it was cold, the water froze and you had no way to get water.
In the Battle of the Blizzard Bowl, as Grimes takes a pitch out from root, he breaks through the line and heads for the sidelines, where he crashes into several tacklers. He's slowed down, but comes through without his helmet and races down the clearing for a TD covering 57 yards.
With 10 of the 12 teams located in cold weather cities, the NFL season was hard on players and playing surfaces.
Most of the football fields, we had to use them as practice fields also. They didn't have these elaborate practice facilities like they have today. You had to practice on the football field on which you played, and it warmed out quite a bit.
By November, most fields were dusty and devoid of grass. These deserts could be rendered perilous by pounding rain, as evidenced by a game at the Polo Grounds between the Cardinals and Giants.
During that game, it rained so hard that one of our guys got in the bottom of a pile, and the water was so deep he almost drowned.
While bad weather ruined the field for some players, it leveled the field for others.
I love to play in the mud because I wasn't the fastest guy in the world, but you put us in mud, and I'm just as fast as most of the guys. Most guys can't run in mud.
The Colts once experienced sloppy field conditions resulting from a force of nature unrelated to weather.
Down at Louisville, we played the Giants an exhibition game, and the only thing they had before the football game was a circus. All right, so circus, you got elephants and you got horses. And for a whole week, they're going all over the damn field. And the day of the game, they never even had the common decency to rake the field. So every once in a while, we put our hand down, and some guy come on and say, Jesus, with a handful of horse manure, you know, or elephant dung. So I said, as long as we're moving, flip it at the offensive line, who cares?
For those who like their football rough and tough, watch this unusual shot as recorded by our sideline camera. Lou Carpenter grabs the pass and is hit hard by 3 bruising Browns.
The 50s was knock 'em, sock 'em, knock you down, and didn't seem to be a tremendous amount of rules.
It's all legal in this great game of football.
You had the rule of the jungle, and it was brutal.
The game was opening up, and players were moving faster. There were more collisions and less conscience. The 49ers' Hardy Brown used his shoulder to knock out 21 opponents in a 12-game season in 1951. Throughout the league, hitting became increasingly vicious, and more players were injured. But the stars were expected to play through the pain, no matter how severe.
I cracked something here, and by the time we flew home, went to the hospital, and they said it was a severely sprained ankle, so they wrapped it, and I played out the rest of the year. As a matter of fact, against Green Bay, I made 157 yards, and I went from 205 pounds to 178. I couldn't sleep at night. My leg was aching, so I went back to the hospital, and the doctor says, you know, you had a broken leg. So I played like this 4 or 5 games on a broken leg.
Tom Tracy of Detroit, his knee came through Chuck's bicep, and just the bicep, the big muscle, flopped down here on the forearm.
Right in here. So what they did, they pushed it up, taped it, and I played, and that's the way it is today.
We were able to do almost anything we wanted to defensively. I mean, you clothesline guys come out of the backfield. The first move the defensive end would do was bring his arm around and hit him right in the face, and boom.
That was taught. That was the practice. The first move was to hook him under the neck. Might hurt him. He might not be able to speak for a few days, but, you know, that was just the way it was.
Bill Pellington, he clotheslined the guy. He hit a kid in the All-Star game, and the kid never played again. The kid swallowed his tongue. Our trainer, Eddie Block, saved the kid's life. Big Daddy saying, don't look at him. None of us will want to play. We could have beat the All-Stars that game by 100 points. They didn't want to play anymore. They said, what kind of animals are we playing against? They found out.
The players of the 1950s were not afforded much protection, either by the rules or by the flimsy equipment of the time. So the players established and enforced their own system of justice.
This is the way it was. Whoever did any vicious headhunting or whatever, you can believe they got paid back. If they didn't get paid back that game, if somebody else seen them, they got paid back.
Players would take care of that themselves, and the officials knew that. The officials knew that we would police the game ourselves.
I know there was a stage there in the middle 50s that it got really dirty. And again, I remember talking to Carol Rosenblum about it and telling him, I said, they better do something about this, or this game's going to get totally out of hand.
I think that the public just didn't care too much for that type of viciousness. The people who loved it were the players and their friends.
A brawl could be the result of a short temper or a long memory. Chuck Bednarik once waited a full year to avenge a late hit by Cleveland's Chuck Noll.
He's lined up next to Lou Groza, who's going to do the kicking off, and my roommate Frank Whiteau was next to me, and I said, "Hey, Frank," I said, "you see that number 65 there?" "Yeah, Charlie." I said, "Let's get him." "Okay, Charlie." And Groza kicked the ball off. I don't know who got it. It was a kickoff return left, but I know all we did, we went towards 65, and finally when we got to him, I tackled him, knocking him down, stumped on him. Frank came along. We're beating the crap out of him. He got up literally frothing from the mouth. "You son of a, you listen, I'll get you. I'll get you. When this game is over, I'll get you."
Chuck Noll and Bednarik are walking off the field. Chuck Noll takes his helmet off with the face mask, and Bednarik pops him.
I went, pow! And of course, everybody gathered around.
We come in the locker room like this. The first thing Paul Brown says, he says, "Chucky, you know you shouldn't ever take a fight with Bednarik with your helmet off."
At the time they were doing that, the Dumont television network that were televising, they're doing closing credits as Chuck beat up Chuck Noll. So Bednarik said when he got home that night, the phone was still ringing. He picks it up, and the commissioner said, "What are you trying to do? We're trying to sell this game, and you work this guy over right on the closing credits."
If the league was to grow, Bert Bell knew it had to clean up its image. In 1955, when Life magazine did a cover story on the NFL entitled "Savagery on Sunday," Bell sued.
Here's this article that comes out in one of the most influential magazines in the country with pictures. The league decided they were going to challenge this article and sue Life magazine for libel. The league won the case, and what was more important as far as the NFL was concerned was that you never really saw a story like that about the NFL thereafter. No other magazine attempted to write a story focusing on that part of the game again, which was just what the NFL wanted and which was why they opposed the suit in the first place.
As commissioner, Bert Bell was the league's most vigorous defender, and he made sure the players were its most visible salesmen.
He came to training camp and would tell us to be very friendly to the fans. After the games, before the games, you shake hands, you sign autographs and things like that, because he was trying to build something.
He would go through all the do's and don'ts about where you hang out, how you're seen off the field, how you conduct yourself, how important it is with the bubblegum cards now becoming a big thing, to be a person that was presentable, to make the game as exciting as they could. But basically, he was looking for that image again off the field. It wasn't phony, but presented them as people separate from the person you saw in the helmet. Ed Sullivan's show on Sunday night, where he'd introduce the athletes on television, my father said, "I want to make sure," he used to tell the PR guy, Joe Labrum, "I want one of our players on every goddamn Sunday night."
I know that you'll get the kick I get out of seeing Alex Webster close up. Alex, stand up there and take a bow, will you please? From professional football, Otto Graham. YA, stand up there and take a bow. And I'd like also to ask one of the Chicago Bears, one of the great ones of the Chicago Bears, stand up and take a bow. Rick Caceres. Rick, would you stand up and take a bow?
I want them on television everywhere. I want them to wear a suit. I want them to look good.
This is Alan Amici of the Baltimore Colts, who today, in the first sudden death playoff in professional football, went across the goal line with the winning touchdown. So let's have a tremendous hand for Alan Amici.
He saw television, the 50s, these people coming back from the war, they were looking for entertainment. How would you take these great athletes? What better way than on television?
Major Weston.
This is Johnny, Major. We're at the Club Livorno. There's a game, all right, but the only way we'll find out where is if we play.
Well, the Giants play in New York, and New York is the media capital of the world. And therefore, any great New York athlete is made larger, driven more quickly to iconic status or superstar status, because the owners of CBS and NBC and the New York Times and all the magazines are based here.
The Giants attracted that influential New York crowd by winning the NFL title in 1956.
Our sideline camera records a classic shot of the Giants' marvelous Mel Triplett. The hard-fighting fullback on a quake-em-shake-em charge bulldozes to the Chicago 3-yard line.
The Giants' success on the field led to even more success off the field, and that caused resentment around the league.
Most of the guys were making $9,000, $10,000, $12,000. And the guys in New York, they were getting all of this extra money for the advertisement, the commercials, and things like that. And everybody in the league resented that. I don't care what they say. If you talk to somebody, they say they didn't, they telling a lie.
Hey, Joe, are you still using that greasy kid stuff on your hair? What else? Vitalis. That's what else.
And then they have the All-American boy, Gifford.
That's it. Rub it in good.
Gifford was a kind of image, and the first one in football, of what ordinary American men would have wanted to have been. Oh, I wish I could have been Frank Gifford, is this feeling.
Come on, sport, get that greasy stuff out of your hair. And then try Vitalis.
Frank Gifford may have symbolized the glamour of pro football in the big city, but the Giants of the 1950s became best known for their punishing defense. It was in New York at Yankee Stadium that the fans first began chanting for the defense, and it was there that a ferocious linebacker named Sam Huff, number 70, became a national celebrity.
Sam Huff, New York's great linebacker, has won more publicity for the pro game's defensive maneuvers than any other single player.
At the end of the decade, suddenly defense, brutal, hard defense, is celebrated. We went from venerating offense above all other things to defense, to toughness. Sports writers tried to come up with key terms that would kind of pin this down. Sanctioned savagery, they would call it. Vengeance with style, try to get some kind of sense of that balance between the artistry of football and the brutality of football.
The camera loves it because the camera catches the action, the violence, the collision. And you can't narrate that on radio, but you show it on television and the fans know immediately this is big time.
I remember when my father saw Sam Huff on the front of Time magazine. See, boys, he said, there he is on the front of Time magazine. He said, I told you, defense is going to begin to take over. The Giants have made defense the big thing. And I remember him calling Chris Schenkel one time. He said, Chris, don't forget to introduce the defense. The fans are in love with the defense, not with the goddamn offense.
We'd like to take you into territory that is forbidden to persons other than the players and people on official business. This is the door to the locker room of the Baltimore Colts. What goes on behind the scenes? Well, let's suppose it's a Sunday morning, the day most Colt games are played. The players get a briefing, just like a pilot about to take off on a flight. Just before game time, the backfield men warm up their pitching arms. And now, the Colts are ready for action. And here's how they did on the field during one of the most exciting seasons in National Pro Football history.
Over the course of the decade, the Baltimore Colts, led by fullback Alan Amici and quarterback Johnny Unitas, went from being one of the NFL's worst teams to one of the best. The Colts quite literally owned the town, and their players were among the first to use their names to score points in business.
This is Alan the Horse Amici. I'd like to invite you to try a Powerhouse sandwich at my drive-in at 5800 Reisterstown Road. I'll meet you at Amici.
I remember we bought our first row house. We paid $8,000 for this house. John Unitas came over and laid our kitchen floor. Everybody pitched in, painted, and helped us get that little row house ready. There was never any, your husband's name in the paper and mine isn't, or, you have a new car and I don't. I don't think that anyone cared who scored the touchdown as long as someone scored it.
I used to come on the field, and something would say, look around the stands and see all these people. In pregame warm-up, and I turn around and I look around. I said, man, phew, I don't believe this. I said, I'm a Baltimore Colt. I'd be pulling at my jersey, looking at that blue.
The Colts of the late 50s were rich in star quality, yet they had a working-class humility that matched the blue-collar fabric of Baltimore. It was a dramatic contrast to the high-profile Giants team they met in their first championship game.
Yankee Stadium jam-packed for the greatest playoff game in pro football history. New York Giants versus the Baltimore Colts for the National Pro title.
It has been called the greatest game ever played. But with 8 fumbles and 8 quarterback sacks, it was hardly that. It was really 59 minutes of prelude, setting the stage for an unforgettable finish.
With only 7 seconds left, Steve Mara boots a field goal to tie up the score, and that brings on the first extra-period sudden death play in football history.
The championship game between the Colts and the Giants is everything people think it is because people think it is. It came at a particularly dramatic moment, and it happened in New York, where all the media people had their ears to the ground. They knew that something was happening here, and that this was gripping theater.
Alan the Horse Amici crashes over for the winning tally. Baltimore Colts win the pro football title 23-17.
It's just everything the whole country wanted. There were no losers, really, because the game is lifted up and it gets parity with pro baseball. The football championship now is as important as the World Series. That's a great moment in American life, and it has happened with astonishing speed.
For the Baltimore players and fans, the celebration was about one game and one championship. But for Bert Bell, it was much more. It was the culmination of his life's work.
After the 58 game ended, I remember Bert Bell standing there. He was very emotional, he was crying. And then years later, I began to realize that Bert Bell was a man that understood the significance of what had happened there that day. I think it's accurate to say, had been nursing the NFL along for quite a while, and he knew that this was a turning point.
Just 10 months later, Bert Bell was dead. He suffered a heart attack while watching an Eagles-Steelers game at Franklin Field. Pete Rozelle was named commissioner, and the league office moved from Bell's second-floor walk-up in Philadelphia to a suite on Park Avenue in New York. It symbolized a move toward a larger, more corporate game. As the decade came to a close, so too did an era in pro football. For the NFL, the 1950s was the decade that served as the bridge from the sandlots to the Super Bowl, a time when the sheer joy of the game reflected the glow of post-war America. For the players of that generation, pro football was more than just a game. It was the game of their lives.
I would have to say the main motivation for playing football in the era I played is because I like to do it. I will bet you my life that I have more fun playing football than the guys do now.
My life is coming to an end, and I'm very proud of what I did at my time. And to be able to say that in my day, I was one of the best that played the game. Not the best, but one of the best. And to say I was a part of that, that was great. And the 50s was the cornerstone, I believe, of what pro football is today.
I would say I was at the right place, at the right time, with the right people, and I think one of the most fortunate things that's ever happened to me was being able to play in the era of pro football that I got to play in. I wouldn't trade it for any era of the NFL's history, and it was an absolutely great experience.
It was just a bunch of guys who enjoyed playing the game with an opportunity to play for a living. A meager living, but a living.